on behalf of the Ignatian Solidarity Network. I just want to welcome you. My name is Chris Kerr. I'm the Executive Director, and I'm really grateful to my colleagues who are with us today, Aaron and Kelly and Kim and Brenna. And as Aaron shared, for those who are just joining, Brenna's provided some instruction for how to adjust your name here on Zoom. Some of us are very familiar with Zoom and use it all the time, and for others, it's still a new experience. So we appreciate your presence, and one of the things that we found out of the pandemic has been that we're all getting better at this, and we're finding new ways to be connected. So this is another great example. Today we have upwards of 200 people from parishes, both Jesuit as well as other Catholic parishes across the United States, who've come to join us and to learn from Father Ken, and really grateful to him for being willing to share some of his experiences and to share the good work that's happening at St. Francis Xavier in New York City. For those of you who are not as familiar with the Ignatian Solidarity Network, we are a lay organization that co-labors with the Jesuits in the larger church. We were founded about 17 years ago to promote collaboration in working for justice across Jesuit ministries, as well as the church, in the larger church. We engage people of all ages through in-person programs, digital campaigns, and resources. And I'd encourage you to if you're not familiar with our website, ignatiansolidarity.net, I'd encourage you to check that out. I'd also like to invite you, if you're not connected with us, to consider joining our mailing list. You can do that by going to ignatiansolidarity.net, and in the top right-hand corner, you can click on Join Our Mailing List and share our information with you. We'd love to find out what parish you're connected with so that we can find other ways to connect with you moving forward. I just want to highlight one way that many parishes utilize our organization as a resource. We have a digital library of faith and justice resources for those who are in Catholic ministry and education, trying to share Catholic social teaching and the social mission of the gospel with their parishioners or students. It's called Education for Justice, and it has over 2,000 resources on a variety of topics. And you can learn more about that at Education for Justice, educationforjustice.org. And I'll make sure that we drop these links into the chat for folks that want to find them. As I said, I'm really grateful that everyone's come here together today to deepen our commitment to working for an end to the realities of racial inequity, as well as white supremacy that exist in our society and even in our church. And sadly, just in the past few weeks, we've seen many signs that this work is desperately needed right now, and that it's long work. It's not going to be something that happens just overnight or really quickly. And so, as we think about the events at the U.S. Capitol a month ago, and the way that realities of racism were very present in how people displayed themselves, their acts, the messages they tried to share, things like that. We see that this work is needed. Sadly, just over the weekend, our partners at Bellarmine Chapel, which is the Jesuit parish at Xavier University, experienced a white supremacist group coming onto campus and defacing the Black Lives Matter banner that they had out in front of the church, and leaving stickers identifying their organization and its mission all over the area and things like that. So I share these not to depress us, but to really remind us of the important work that we all need to be doing, and the important work that especially that white people need to be doing in partnership with their allies, people of color in our church. And so I'm really glad you're here today, and I'm really grateful to Father Ken for being willing to share with us. So I'm going to turn things back over to Aaron and Brenna just to facilitate um, any more issues with the name changing, things like that. But thank you again on behalf of the ISN. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Chris. I dropped the agenda in the chat, and I'll ask one of my colleagues to do that again for your reference. And I'll just walk you through a bit of what to expect this afternoon. I'm going to turn things over pretty quickly to Ken Boller, our guest speaker for today. He'll share a few reflections. And as you saw in the email earlier today, hopefully, that we collected a few questions beforehand, which we'll turn over to Father Ken following his remarks. But if you have any questions now or that come up as he's speaking, go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get as many of those to him as we have time for today. From there, we'll spend a little bit of time in small groups, and then we'll regather, and that'll be about our time together. But without further ado, I will turn things over to the real Father Ken Boller, who is so kind to join us today. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Erin. I'm not totally sure how much people are going to learn today, but I thought best to start by giving a little bit of a historic overview, not going back forever and ever, but just a few things to situate us in where I intersect this and where the parish of the Church of St. Francis Xavier intersects these issues. Starting with, I arrived at Xavier Parish in September of 2019. So I'm currently still only in my second year. You know, my pastorate has been largely characterized by pandemic. My prior, I did do a prior stint as a pastor in Harlem for 7 years, but most of my career has been in school administration, high school administration. When I arrived, the parish had already been engaged in conversation on racial justice, and in particular had a very fruitful dialogue with St. Charles Borromeo Parish in Harlem, which is an archdiocesan parish whose pastor, Greg Chisholm, is a Jesuit from the Eastern Province. And those conversations led to, after some dialogue, led to starting of a racial justice book club here at Xavier, and a group of 10 or 12 folks continued on reading, and I joined the group in part and then caught up on some of their reading. Father John Mulroney, who's on this call as well, took the leadership of being the moderator of that group as we move forward. Xavier, for those that are not familiar with it, is very much and very blessed by active and very prayerful lay leadership. And that's particularly spearheaded by our pastoral council, 10 men and women who, after discernment, are elected to lead the parish. And one of the things they do as a matter of habit in late September, early October of every year is to have their own pastoral council retreat. And during that time, they look to set priorities, apostolic priorities for the year. So I very quickly got involved with them in that. And it was in the course of the conversation, the dialogue over that weekend, we concluded that one of the things we wanted to emphasize in the 2019-2020 year was our own efforts to further educate ourselves and the whole parish on issues of racial justice and white supremacy. And so we started that. We again typically have a ministries retreat in February. We're going to have it another one this weekend. It will be a Zoom this one. And during that time, we bring leadership of all of the various ministries. There are about 24 different active ministries in the parish. They come together in February, and we review the year, and we look at what the priorities of the parish are and how each of the ministries intersects into that area. And in the course of, we had a wonderful presentation from a Black Catholic theologian by the name of Craig Ford, who challenged us on the issues of racism in the Catholic Church. It was very, very powerful. And from that, the various ministries were challenged to look and see how in their activities, in their own lived experience in the church, they had either been the subject of or the actors in bias of any sort, whether it be racial bias, sexual identity bias, any kind of bias that they may have had. So we were rolling on that in the 19/20 school year, academic year. And then, of course, the events in May with the brutal murder of George Floyd not only galvanized the country, and here in New York City, we're a block and a half from Union Square, which is one of the epicenters of the Black Lives Matter protests. And we're about 6 blocks from Washington Square, which was another center in Manhattan. So the parish felt the need to really galvanize around this issue. And the immediate and quick response was to create an evening Zoom prayer on that Saturday of the 5th of June. We're blessed by some very creative folks in the Sacred Space Ministry, and they created some iconography for the high altar behind our worship space, using the blow up, a 2-foot by 3-foot blow up of pictures of 3 African Americans who had been victims of police violence: George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. The pastoral council then worked with us. We adapted from a Unitarian church's source, a pledge for racial justice, which we formatted in a question and answer format, and adopted for our use in our parish. And then in the middle of June, on the 14th, we had a terrific live streamed and an in-person prayer service called Action from Lamentation, Fury, and Hope. So that really put a spark plug in our efforts. And 2 of our pastoral staff began work. One started a segment of a Just Faith program. It's a kind of off-the-shelf program for 6 to 8 weeks, and there's one on racial justice. Another of our staff started spiritual conversations on race and racism and racial justice, a 6 to 8 week program. They had about 24 people to that. There were about 20 people in the Just Faith program. And we were kind of sailing along. We had, some of our parishioners, were hesitant about the use of our Black Lives Matter, our pledge. And the language of use of white supremacy was strong for some. What we wound up doing is we sat down and talked to them. We told them that the language was deliberately provocative. It's part of our overall educational effort for all of us, and we asked them to bear with us and to participate in various opportunities that we would be offering for education and prayer on the subject. Some, of course, chose just to remain silent during when we were asking, do you promote racial justice? Well, you just remain silent. We find that there are some who find it necessary to put on their winter clothes during this period, and rather than actively engage in it. But that's okay, because a real response to racial justice involves conversion of the heart, and that is a grace. And while we can have a certain amount of action to promote it, grace is a gift, and that can't be prescribed. We were rolling along pretty well until the end of the summer. And August 31st, Michelle Macon, supposedly Catholic, has a blog, and she posted a clip from our 11:30 live stream mass, which I presided at, in which we recited the pledge, which is done after the post-communion prayer. She alleged that it was done in place of the creed, and that sparked a huge amount of public protest from all sorts of folks of various stripes. It became a a segment on the Tucker Carlson show, and then by the end of the week, we were on Glenn Beck, all of them erroneously complaining that we were substituting the Nicene Creed for this pledge for racial justice. Ultimately, because I have a parishioner keeps track of this, they got 1.2 million viewers. I received over 50 snail mail letters, over 500 emails, and multiple phone calls over the course of the next couple of months. When we got this blowback, first thing I did was send copies of the pledge and of our explanation. We wrote an explanation, which subsequently the Pastoral Council fine-tuned, and the more elegant explanation is on our website. We sent that to the Archdiocese, the Vicar General, and to the province, so that they would be informed of what the facts were, and rather than just deal with the blowback. The Vicar General responded to my email with gratitude. He said, "Thank you very much. The phones have been off the hook, as you might expect." He said, "I have all material. Thank you. We'll get back to you." I'm still waiting. And that's not a bad thing. In reality, within a month, the Archdiocese was sponsoring 2 sessions for pastors on how to preach on racial justice. In one of the, I didn't attend this one, I attended a number of them. The Cardinal Archbishop has periodic Zoom webinar conferences with the clergy and the deacons of the diocese in order to kind of keep in touch with them during the pandemic. And in the one in October, there was somebody raised their hand at a chat, said, "Well, what are you doing about this thing going on at Xavier?" To which the Vicar General simply said, "We're handling it." And that was the end of it. So sometimes no news is good news. And we were very grateful for the, in Robert Bolt's play, A Man for All Seasons, silence means consent. There was an article in the Catholic News Agency that reporter come on us right very soon. I must say he was excellent. In 90% of his article was a direct quote from either things we had written or my interview with him, and he represented us accurately. That this was post-communion, and although not in the rubric strictly, not uncommon for churches to have an announcement after the post-communion and before the final blessing. And it was not a substitute for the creed. The National Catholic Reporter had an article in November, a couple months later, that was posted as a possible entree to this article, to this conference. Subsequently, during the Pastoral Council, we also decided to we have a couple of banners on our gates, a banner that says, "The Catholic Church says Black Lives Matter." So within a couple of weeks, the V in lives was blacked out so that it read Black Lives Matter. Our maintenance staff cleaned off the paint, and we took care of that. A few weeks later, somebody took a razor, an X-Acto blade, and cut out black. But we just replaced them. That happened 2 times in the fall, and then in the week of the storming of the Capitol, somebody clipped the banners off our fence and took them away. Fortunately, I had spares in the back, and within a couple of days, we put them up again. And I ordered more spares because this will not end. But we will not stop either. Subsequently, we've continued with our Pastoral Council retreats, some virtual concerts, and other initiatives with St. Charles Borromeo and St. Francis de Sales. With the 3 parishes, we're creating a Lenten racial justice examen, and we've had several other programs going on. And all of this, and I will end right now, the essence of it is the buy-in from our lay leadership, and especially the leadership of our Pastoral Council. From the get-go, they had already been involved with this. And then when I came, that it was clear that as we took the steps that we took, everybody was on board, and that also became the buffer for me as the pastor, because this is a very outspoken parish, and people are very happy to express their opinions to me and to others. And what they did, with the members of the pastoral council have been exemplary in discussing with members of the parish and others what we're doing and how we're doing it. Just for anybody who wants to know, for all of the for the letters I received, I created a boilerplate language to send back and explain what we stood. For the emails, I would scan them, and the ones that looked like they might be open to conversation, I would attempt a brief dialogue in an email. Usually that broke down within 2 or 3 exchanges. A lot of them, I simply said, thank you very much for your email. We will agree to disagree, and let us pray for one another. And I just put them in the file that I have for that, because it was not the time or place for dialogue. Most of the phone calls were angry phone calls that 1 or 2 of them attempted dialogue, but anger got in the middle of it. So that's a basic story.
Thank you so much. We collected a few questions beforehand that I will share with you. And then to folks joining us, if you have questions still, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll keep an eye on it here too. And a few of these you did touch on in your reflections, one asking about the response from the Archdiocese. But one I think that sort of builds off your remarks there at the end, asks, what is your advice for raising the level of interest among parishioners in anti-racist efforts and handling defensiveness at acknowledging privilege, especially white privilege? This person writes that, I would say at least half the people I've encountered are disinterested, engaging in any self-education or action, and are defensive when it comes to confronting their own privilege.
Yeah, there's no, I wish there was one size fits all on that, and there really isn't, because clearly the parishes, the communities we serve are, all over the lot in the spectrum. I was having a conversation with a Jesuit friend of mine a little while ago, who was trying to figure out how to have conversation with his 92-year-old mother, who was very dedicated to listening to Tucker Carlson and Glenn Beck, and is sure that Trump won the election. And he said, where do you begin in that conversation? And respecting her age and so forth. You begin. I've always felt you begin the conversation with invitation and citing the gospel. All of the priests who preach here at Xavier are attuned to breaking open the Word of God in light of contemporary issues, and so especially since the Black Lives Matter movement has been in the forefront, each in his own way has taken the opportunity, not incessantly but often, to speak about racial justice and the need to deal with it and to confront white privilege in different ways. We've offered these many programs, as I said, in the parish. I think what you do is you start by inviting people who are willing to talk about it to do so. You start, as happened here at Xavier, you start by getting a reading group to read some wonderful books. Father Brian Massingale from Fordham wrote a wonderful book on the racism in the Catholic Church. There are other things about confronting white privilege and white supremacy. There are some fine books of reflections that begin to open up the conversation. And you start by creating circles of people who are willing to have the conversation. And then from those circles, you invite other people to come. And you basically, you have to have the courage to keep going forward.
Thank you. I think you answered questions of multiple people asking for sort of those concrete steps. So that's helpful. Someone else asked, what do you suggest if your pastor is afraid of offending the police by having a banner?
Well, again, all circumstances are local. I think Uh, if you have good relationships with your local police department, you can put up, we have also a sign that indicates all immigrants are welcome. We have another sign that indicates all people are God's people, and it's got a LGBTQ theme to it. We have a lot of different banners on our church. But I think if you have a good relationship with your police department, you can speak to the precinct captain or someone and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. And being in favor of Black Lives Matter, most responsible police around the country, and I have relatives who are police, are appalled at the violence around George Floyd's murder. They're appalled that that is not good policing. They're appalled at the overreaction of a lot of different circumstances. And what they would be the first ones to look for appropriate reform of police tactics. And it's not a question of, I think one of the mistakes of the ultra left in the Democratic Party is to say to defund the police. It has to be refunding, demilitarizing the police, not making them the first agents for social interaction with mentally disturbed persons and so forth. There's a lot of different things. Anyway, it's much more complicated than just all of our fears are real, and they're all local, but conversation helps break that down.
Thank you. That was a challenging question. I appreciate your perspective. Someone asked a little bit more broadly, suggestions that you might have for parishioners who are interested in looking to get started in racial justice work within their parish, but might be experiencing pushback from clergy or from parish leadership.
Well, that is, that is like the major issue of a lot of this. And that's why I applaud the fact that the Archdiocese of New York created a two-phased webinar to help introduce to the clergy opportunities and ways to break open the gospel, to speak about racial justice. Because a lot of folks are they're just afraid. They don't know what to say, and they're afraid. So I think, as with so many things, different parishioners know how to lobby for with their pastors, I say use all of the skills you have.
Thank you. Another individual asked if you have specific recommendations of books that would weave Catholic social teaching with contemporary issues. I know you've mentioned a few with Father Brian Massingale's. I think someone else actually was able to share maybe the list of books that you had read in your book club at your parish, but if you have specific recommendations for folks.
Sure. I mean, Father Mulroney's on this call, and he can certainly post the books, because it's if I start listing them, I'm for sure going to get it all wrong. But we can. It's easy to post those after the fact.
Awesome. He is in fact the person who posted them, so that's awesome. Let me take a look. I think a lot of these questions have been answered, through others. I'm just taking a look to make sure I'm not missing anything. Here's a new one. Does the impact of polarization shift the discussion of racism at your parish to a political conversation? And then how do you steer that back from partisanship to a conversation grounded in the gospel?
For better or worse, we're in Manhattan, and which is particularly a liberal bastion, but it is not exclusively so. And I know that I lost a couple of parishioners who told me that they thought that our preaching was getting too political. That was their expression, and I knew they were not sympathetic with what was going on there, and that some of that's inevitable. And you know, you can't tailor your message to please everyone. We, the majority of us, really work very hard to try to stick to the gospel and gospel and Catholic social teaching, to break open the word and to avoid partisan things. But for some, just the use of the word white supremacy or white privilege is a political statement. So we've had sessions, and in fact, in our recent bulletin, our racial justice discussion group has put a little definition of white privilege out. It's a fairly benign one, but it's one that looks and says, well, all right, what does this mean? How do I understand it? And it is decidedly apolitical. So you have to just keep going back. It's a line that you can't be guaranteed never to cross, but it's a line that if you stick to the gospel, you're okay.
Thank you. And thank you again for being with us, sharing your reflections and answering these questions. We still have some coming in. I'll make note of them, and we're also going to save the chat. So we'll see if there's time to circle back. But for now, we're going to move into breakout rooms so that you
Just one quick question I can answer. It happens to be a recent one. One of the great experiences I had about 20 years ago was taking Father Walter Burkhart's program on preaching the just word. And that program went around the country many times. I'm not sure if it's still actively being promoted, but it's a 5-day retreat geared for clergy, and it's exactly about breaking over the gospel for the whole of Catholic social teaching. Anyway, that's a quickie, and then you can go to you.
No worries. But we're going to send you all into small groups. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope that you all had a fruitful discussion. Unfortunately, time doesn't allow for us to have sharebacks from every group, but I will invite you to share in the chat a word or phrase or an idea that maybe reflects a takeaway from your conversation with your group to share with the larger group. And then in closing, I'm going to turn it over to Ken before I share a few future opportunities with ISN.
Great, thank you very much. And I hope this has been helpful to folks because obviously we're at everything from the baby steps to more advanced levels. A couple of things to remember, and then I'd just like to use a quote from Hebrews today. It's all a matter of conversion, and that's a difficult and slow process. The history of racism in the world, let alone the United States, is centuries old, and so we have to have patience and courage in trying to deal with it. And remember that it is an act of grace, and therefore treat even those who seem the thickest, with the same kind of grace. I was struck this morning in our section from the letter to the Hebrews. He's encouraging the Jewish Christians who are discouraged because things aren't working out. They're thrown out of Jerusalem. They don't know what they're doing. And he's saying, sometimes you're being disciplined. And they did. So it says, at the time, all discipline seems a cause not for joy, but for pain. And yet later, it's the peaceful fruit of righteousness for those who are trained by it. So strengthen your drooping hands and your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet, that what is lame may not be dislocated, but healed. Strive for peace with everyone, and for that holiness without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one will be deprived of the grace of God, and that no bitter roots spring up and cause trouble, through which many have become defiled. It's easy to let the bitter root defile us. The grace of God is with us, and so with that courage, we should move forward.
Thank you, and thanks again for being with us, sharing your experience and your insight. We've been really grateful for your presence.